Good morning and welcome to the Lightcast studio for this JOLTS live analysis, a U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics report that gives us some indication to what's happening into the health of our economy. JOLTS stands for Job Openings Labor Turnover Survey. On this November 1st, 2022, I'm your host, Christopher Laney, and I am joined by two of our very talented economists, Chief Economist Bloody Tuska and Senior Labor Economist Layla O'Kane. Bloody and Layla, welcome to the studio.
Thanks, Chris. Good to have you back.
Good morning.
I appreciate that. It's been a couple of months, and I feel like not much has happened over the last couple of months, maybe in the economy, or maybe not, especially today. So the JOLTS report just came out 30 minutes ago. Bloody, I'm going to start with you. Your first, feelings towards this report, because I think it was a little bit of a shock for all of us.
Well, first of all, good morning. Second of all, I'm going to answer via a little bit of an indirect way. So I'm going to ask you a question. How was your Halloween last night, Chris?
It was fun. I got to take kids out. We have buckets and buckets of candy. So sling around.
You guys get a lot more candy than before?
Yes, way too much candy. I feel like inflation hasn't connected to the candy sales yet.
Yeah, I think it's the same with the labor market. I think, yes, there's a lot of demand. And so this is what we saw in the data today. Demand is pretty hot. So a very surprising report. We saw openings increase to 10.7 million, a rise from the 10.3 million before, so around 5%. That was the largest surprise. Honestly, none of us was expecting that number. And I'm for sure that the Fed chair did also not expect that number. The rest of the report was fairly a little bit more straightforward. Hires decreased a little bit, but that was expected. Again, it's sort of a fallout from the previous report where we saw job openings drop. So I think there's a lagged effect there. And again, as expected, probably quits and separation generally they were reduced. But the labor demand increasing and the candy demand increasing, those were definitely not some of the surprises.
So Layla, I thought the labor market was supposed to be cooling. I guess not. What's your first take on this?
Yeah, it feels like deja vu. A few months ago, we were talking about how, is this a soft landing the Fed is trying to engineer? Is it even a landing at all? And I think we're back to the question, is it even a landing at all? With job openings up and separations down, this just looks like it did a few months ago.
Yeah, it was fascinating. So in preparation for today, and we were talking about this a little bit ago before we went live. It was like, it's probably going to go down. That's like the expectations we all had. And so I was looking at Lightcast data, job postings from third quarter of 2021 to third quarter of 2022, and it's up. It's almost up 20%. And I went, okay, so we're going to have less openings and job postings are still up. My question to you is, again, looking at, we were looking at Lightcast data and job postings. How closely aligned are job openings and job postings? Layla, to you,
job postings are a great proxy for job openings, but they're not exactly the same. Sometimes job postings can be higher because, let's say you're posting on your own company website, and then maybe you post a second location as an optional second location for your job as well. That's two job postings, but maybe it's only representing one opening because it could be in either, remote or, let's say, in Washington State, something like that. So it's a good proxy, but it's not exactly the same. And that's kind of why we look to this JOLTS survey to get at those exact numbers.
So, Bloody, there's this a looming interest rate that potentially could go up. The hike could happen again. Do you feel like any indicators in this report that consumer spending is slowing down a little bit, or are we just gearing up for a strong holiday season?
Well, first of all, I don't think there's a question of the interest rate potentially going up. I mean, it was almost certain before, and it's absolutely certain right now that it will go up, and it will go up by 0.75% points. So on that part, again, there was never a question. There was potentially a question of maybe on the next one and then meeting in December. Again, depending how the economy will pan out and what it will see, maybe we saw a bit of a reduction in the increase rate. But the next one, which is in today's, interest rates are absolutely going up. They were going up before, and they're 110% going up now. I mean, in terms of the demand, again, if you see the numbers, we saw in transportation, we saw an increase in job opening. So that's an indicative of essentially a lot of the companies wrapping up for holiday season. The one thing that we have seen in previous years is that this holiday season has somehow moved a little bit, earlier. Again, a lot of that has to do with because of the online shopping, increasing significantly to retail and the mortar, brick and mortar. So we've probably seen some of the effects right now. Like if we were like 3-4 years ago, we might have seen this ramping up, maybe happening maybe later in November, and we're seeing it early in October. So that is effect. But again, consumer demand is still very strong, and we see it in the numbers again through the sectors that had the largest increase was transportation and a lot of also in accommodation and food services.
So you think that in this specific report, which is lag, so it's September numbers, that maybe even some of the job openings or some of the reflection is for companies hiring up for this holiday season coming up just a little bit earlier, potentially?
Yeah, and we saw that even 2 years ago. We saw that shift happening from later October to actually earlier September. So I do think that there is some of that actually happening right now. Like we can call it the Amazon effect, quote unquote, but again, a lot of shopping happening online, and that makes it a lot easier. Like Amazon this year they had a earlier or a second Prime Day, right? That tells you that they're trying to spread out the whole consumption period, and the consumer demand is still very strong.
And just to add to that, we had some supply chain issues during the pandemic, and I think companies are trying to get on top of the holiday season to kind of combat that and make sure that they're predicting that demand well.
Well, and one of the things that we've been monitoring and we've talked about here at Lightcast over the last couple of months is just the huge retail inventory levels right now that a lot of businesses are still trying to offload. So I think there's some predictions between 30 and 6% of inventory levels are still up. And so how is that going to play a role into consumer spending if they're gonna do promotions and try to discount, unload all that high inventory that they have right now? So Leila, do you feel like consumers are still kind of in the driver's seat right now when it comes to spending? And we're supposed to have this like looming recession that everybody's been talking about right now, but yet it still seems like consumers are in the driver's seat, especially when it comes to eating out or travel, some of those other areas. Does this report reflect any of that right now?
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely seeing, with openings up and separations down, I think we're seeing what we've been seeing a little bit all along, which is that employees or workers are maybe a little bit in the driver's seat here still. So we're not seeing, again, any scares about mass layoffs. That's not really being played out in the data. And I want to talk about that. We've been talking a bunch about accommodation and food services and retail, but I want to talk a little bit about the tech sector because that's something that comes up a lot. And we're really not seeing what I think people have been afraid of. So, we've had big shakeup at Twitter recently. There have been a lot of fears of big layoffs. There have been some layoffs in some of the tech sector in Silicon Valley, but that's not being played out across the sector overall. We saw openings up, information, and separations down. And so I think it's important to just remember that the tech sector is bigger than Silicon Valley and is proving itself to be still a pretty tight labor market across the board, and especially in tech.
I guess it's just a bit confusing because like every day when I log on to LinkedIn, the headlines are this company's laying off this many people and this company's laying off this many people. And you're right. It's always the tech sector, and it's specifically those large companies. They're either laying off people or they're slowing their hiring. But when we look at the industry overall, like you said, it doesn't seem to be a reflection.
So Chris, it's interesting because I mean, if you ask most people, what are the top occupations out there? They wouldn't be, you'll not get an easy answer. But people forget that, the top occupations are truck drivers, nurses, and retail salespeople, and then there's software developers. You're not hearing about any layoffs in truck driving, right? You're not hearing about any layoffs in the healthcare industry, and you're not hearing even in the retail industry any layoffs. So economy is a lot larger than what we see in LinkedIn or, it's in related, sort of social media or in Twitter. But there's significantly bias to the people that go there. And again, a lot of those people work in tech or interact with tech. But overall, the economy is very healthy. I mean, in terms of employees themselves, you have historically low unemployment rate. You are not seeing layoffs in the economy. You actually saw a decrease, from 1.5 to 1.3 of the layoffs. So yeah, I mean, from the employee perspective, the economy is very healthy, so they're going to continue spending. They feel secure. their jobs are not on the line, why wouldn't they, keep spending, right? From the employer's perspective, similarly, I think in the majority of the cases, we are not seeing profits going down. We're seeing very good reports. Yes, there are some cases of bad reports, but the majority of the reports are pretty good. And see the stock market, although we did have a very, very strong, jobs report in the last time, which actually was bad news for the Fed. The stock market has increased by 12-15% in the past couple of weeks. So all of those indicate a very, very healthy economy. Now, that's usually very good news for almost everyone, but Powell.
So, Bloody and Layla, this question goes to you. Why is the labor market right now so resilient to what's happening around it? Layla, we'll start with you, and then Bloody will come to you. Same question for both of you.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're still just looking at a lot of companies coming out of labor shortages and having a hard time hiring for all of the jobs that they really want filled. And we're still seeing that. I mean, we're seeing that companies have these open positions that they're trying to get folks in. And maybe to some extent, people have taken some time out of the labor market, especially due to COVID, and are kind of slowly ramping back up. And that might be lagged a little bit.
So kind of looking at backfilling a lot of these open positions, but not necessarily potentially creating new jobs. Is that kind of what you're saying?
I think it could be both. Yeah.
Okay. Bloody, same question to you. Why is the labor market so resilient to everything that's happening around it?
I think it's not the labor market. Labor market is a reflection of the economy. I think the economy is strong. And I think the economy is strong because there's consumer demand. If you ask me what's one of the reasons, I think one of the reasons is that we still have not spent a lot of the money that we've saved during the past couple of years. I mean, yes, some of the consumer debt is going up, but if you look some of the numbers in terms of the savings, we probably have consumed only probably 1/3 of the excess savings that happened during the past 2 years. So there's still a room for people to actually spend the savings that all these past 2 years they couldn't go anywhere, they couldn't travel, even. To buy a couch, you needed sometimes a year for the couch to come. So I'd be like, hey, whatever, I don't care. So there's a lot of saving that happened. There was forced saving, and so like that still is fitting into the economy. So the fire that is fitting the economy. When that gets exhausted, then maybe, and we're seeing some more of a weak demand, then the labor market will reflect that. But as long as the demand is still high, then the labor market is going to follow that.
Yeah, you bring up a good point. There were kind of two perspectives. There was an article that was put out by Axios yesterday that said that we still have $1.7 trillion in savings that was collected over the pandemic, mostly from the CARES Act. And that was just down from 2.3 trillion. And so with all that pent up savings, people want to go out and eat and travel and things that they couldn't do for a while. So how is that infusion going to affect the economy? And there's been two perspectives. Will it stay in savings because of this looming potential recession, or will people continue to spend and consumers drive what's happening, what we're seeing right now play out in the economy? Do we feel like, kind of almost last question, do we feel like we're just in a cycle where good news is good news for everyone? Kind of, Bloody, you said this. Everybody agrees that a booming economy right now is pretty much good news, except for the Feds. Are we just kind of in a cycle that good news is bad news all the time? And Bloody, I'll give that to you, and then I'll go to you, Layla.
I'm, again, generally throughout the cycle, I've been more optimistic than other people. I think there is this risk that is looming, and that's what people are afraid of. But to be honest, we're not seeing any danger of that. Like, people are worried because they were used to, almost to a golden period of almost zero real interest rates. And they're like, whoa, well, now we need to go to 7, 8. But again, interest rates historically have been higher, and people have lived through higher, interest rates, even, buying houses, and that was fine. It will need some adjustment. I think the biggest danger and the risk is if this will bring the economy into recession. So I think that's like the largest and the main and only problem at this moment. If you abstract from that, everything else is actually pretty fine. We are in a very healthy economy. And so I'm personally optimistic. I think even with higher interest rates, we will adjust as long as things continue to be the same way. I'm always worried about geopolitical issues. So those are things that are completely out of control, China, Russia, etc. But if things are the way they've been going on, even if the Fed continues its interest rate policy, I think we'll be fine.
Layla, to you, are we just in this cycle? Are you as optimistic as Bloody? Are we just in a cycle? Good news is bad news.
I think I am as optimistic as Bloody. I mean, Bloody's right. I think, what Powell is trying to do, right, is to encourage people to save money, and hiking interest rates is hopefully going to mean that spending goes down. And I think I would be more worried if we were really in a wage price spiral where prices were increasing and therefore wages were increasing and therefore prices were increasing. I think we're seeing that to some extent with prices, but we haven't seen that to the same extent with wages. And so sort of until we get there, I'm not too worried. So I think, if I were Powell, I would be a little worried, but I'm not.
So Layla, I'm going to go to you for our final takeaways and then to Bloody. But before I do, I think one concern that when I was reading that report about the $1 trillion in savings, it does show that most of that money is being held by higher income earners. So I think one of the things that we should continue to keep an eye on is the fact that maybe some of the income inequality that's occurring potentially where higher earners we have savings, we can afford the inflation, lower earners, we can't afford inflation, and we don't have the savings. So something maybe we could keep an eye on over the next few months. But Layla, I do want to go to you for your final takeaways, looking at this JOLTS report and how you feel about it.
Yeah, final takeaways. This was a surprising report. So job openings were up, separations were down. And in specific sectors, we saw that trend play out that I think we weren't expecting. So that's including in the tech sector, in a combination of food services, and in transportation and warehousing. Surprising.
Bloody, to you, final takeaways for this JOLTS report?
Labor market is as tight as it has ever been, and I don't think there are any signs inside that is going to loosen up.
Bloody, Layla, thank you so much for this good conversation today. I know both of us, all of us came into this just kind of shocked by the openings. A lot of us were. And so thank you so much for this conversation and this live analysis. For more information, you can visit us at lightcast.io. Please join us on Friday as we jump into another live analysis of the employment situation. Thank you and have a good rest of your day.